When we accept.
We have one meeting in, please.
Oh, sorry, we are just having a conversation.
It's now 6:30, so I'm opening the meeting. So welcome everyone to this meeting of the Alcohol and Gambling Licensing Committee. Thank you for attending. I'll start by reading the evacuation procedure. There is a location plan of the exits and the assembly points situated on the doors of this room. Please familiarise yourself with it. On discovering a fire, please carry out the following: sound the alarm, attack the fire if possible, and it's safe to do so using the appliance provided. On hearing the evacuation signal, please carry out the following: exit the building by your nearest, safest exit. All visitors report to assembly point G, or staff report to their designated assembly point on Warpack Way car park. Do not leave the assembly point for any reason until told to do so by the incident controller or a fire brigade officer. I have apologies from councillors Farrow, Hancox, MacDonald or Hayes as she is, Moss and Osborne. We note those apologies. Agenda item 3 is disclosure of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. Do we have any? See any? Thank you. Agenda item 4, public participation. None. Agenda item 5 is the minutes of the Alcohol and Gambling Licensing Committee held on the 18th of July 2022, which I'd like to thank Councillor Cruz for standing in as taking over as chair. I'd like to thank Councillor McLaughlin for pointing out that there's a slight omission on page 7 of 25 in that the last part of the final sentence has been missed off.
Chair, I'd like to ask, has there been any feedback? I mean, I know it was a long meeting that was, but has there been any feedback from the premises or from the residents as to how it's gone?
Chair, from my knowledge, I think it's no news is good news. We obviously, I think members were aware of a long ongoing problem at those premises and culminated in that application. My understanding now is that there is much less of a problem, and we certainly haven't been quite taking formal action.
Thank you, Carl. So, just continue what I was saying. So I propose that we accept the minutes subject to the correction that Councillor McLaughlin has pointed out, which is that if we add to the end of the last sentence on page 5 or 4, the word "shall," the fact that they have taken no action. Is that correct?
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
So, subject to that slight amendment, is everyone happy with those minutes? Happy that I sign them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agenda item 6 is the general fund fees and charges for 2023-24. And is it Sue?
It is, Chair, but as you can see from the report, all of the licences are statutory, so they really are more for noting and then publishing them.
Does anyone have any comments or questions or want to Sue anything?
Yeah, so it's more because I'm just not understanding. On page 19 of 21, it's just I just want clarification. Does grant mean it's been granted? If you look at club gaming permits, it says underneath it says grant, then it's grant club premises certificate holder, then it's existing operator grant. That word grant, does it mean it's been granted, or what does it mean?
Yeah, I assume it means it's a license that's been granted. So if this is just a license fee, I don't know.
I think it means the grant of a license.
It's for members' benefits on page 19 and 25, the various permits for gaming machines, and as Sloan said, the legislation requires us to charge particular fees, and these are the way they're described in the legislation. So they're all grants of those particular licenses that are listed So it's what they pay us on application for the grant of that licence.
Being a council, I thought they were going for grants or what they were doing, so I just didn't know why they couldn't have put granted rather than grants.
I don't know, Joe, but if I can be absolutely clear, no, we're not giving any grants out
Yeah.
in that sense.
I just like to be clear. I don't like sitting on something when I don't understand what I'm saying yes to. Thanks very much.
Anyone else? My understanding there's been a revaluation of the properties. Is that could you explain, Clive, whether that has an impact on?
Chair, that's right. This year, well, so with effect from the 1st of April this year, revaluation has been carried out of the rateable value for all non-domestic premises in England and Wales, and that's a task which is outside this council's control. So they will take effect on the 1st of April, and it's not a straightforward change in terms of everything going up or everything going down. There is different categories of change in those valuations, and therefore there's a possibility that some of these premises which are licensed under the Licensing Act for sale of alcohol and that type of thing may potentially move up or down the band, but we can't say with any certainty yet. We have no control over the revaluation and no control over the fees because they're set by statute. It's more for members' information since there may be an impact of some sort later, and obviously we report back if there was any particular issue identified.
Thank you, Clive. Before we move to the recommendation, just one final chance for anyone to comment or ask any questions. No. In that case, the recommendation is that the schedule of fees and charges for 2023-24 as set out in Appendix A be noted. That's been moved by Councillor Humphreys, seconded by Councillor Jordan. All in favour? Agenda item 7 is the general fund revenue estimates for 23-24. I believe that's you again, Sue, is it?
It is, Chair, thank you, yes. As we normally do, and hopefully you'll remember from last year, we have a look at the current year's budget, the 22-23 revised budget, and you'll see from that actually we've had very small improvement on the position. We're not talking large numbers for the licensing committee, but we have a small improvement of £2,000, due to some additional premise renewal licences. When we get forward into 23-24 then, that hasn't continued through to the following year, but that's primarily because, of course, the staffing around licensing have had payrolls and so forth. Some of the costs have gone up, but the income hasn't necessarily. So it's a slightly worse position for 23-24.
Thank you, Sue. Does anyone wish to raise anything on that? Councillor Humphreys.
Page 11, at the top, the employee costs. How many do we employ for that? It'd be either 7.2 or 11 of 27.
Sorry, just gone.
21.
Sorry, I looked at the right agenda.
On the wrong page.
I've moved on to taxes and
I think you're on page
I do beg your
61.
pardon.
There's only 25 pages in the alcohol.
Yeah, I thought taxi and licensing, but what are we doing now?
Alcohol.
We're still on alcohol.
Oh, I'm still on alcohol. I'll shut up.
Been wanting to go home again, ain't you?
Okay, sorry.
It threw me for a minute.
Yeah.
You're confusing me there.
I take that back.
Have you got any other questions on that, Marion, or
No.
anyone else? No? In that case, I think we'll move to the recommendation, which is, lost it, hold on. To accept the revised budget for 22-23 and to accept or otherwise vary the estimates of expenditure for 2023-24 as submitted, for them to be included in the budget to be brought before the meeting of the Executive Board on the 13th of February. It's been moved by Councillor Clues, seconded by Councillor Humphreys. All in favour? Anyone against? No, it's carried. Thank you. I believe that brings us to the close of that meeting. Thank you for your attendance on that. Go straight into the next one.
Medal.
Yeah. We now move to the Taxi and General Licensing Committee agenda. Welcome members. The apologies as before are Councillor Farrow, Councillor Hancock, Councillor MacDonald, Hayes, Councillor Moss, Councillor Osborne. On this occasion we have Councillor Jarvis as a substitute, so welcome Councillor Jarvis. Agenda item 1, evacuation procedure. I don't think I need to read that again unless you want me to. Many apologies. Disclosure of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. Again, I see no hands. Agenda item 4, public participation. Again, we appear to have none. Agenda item 5 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of June 2022. Hope you all have a copy of that. Does anyone wish to comment? So you're happy for me to sign them? It's a correct record. Agenda item 6 is the general fund fees and charges for 2023-24. Is this you, Sue?
It is, Chair, yes, thank you. Not really anything to add to the report, hopefully it's fairly straightforward. Generally, an inflation increase with the exception of the carriages, which, as the report says, is because of the state of the market to some extent.
Does anyone have any questions or comments? Councillor Humphreys?
I'll put my hand up very slowly. 7-2. At the top, the employee costs. But the next bit.
You're jumping ahead.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Councillor Humphreys, I think you've jumped ahead to the next report again.
Oh, I'm just going to shut up in a minute.
Let's just give in Sue
This is
a bit
being
of advance warning.
Okay, now. We go on.
I don't see any other hands, so shall we move to the recommendation? That the schedule of fees and charges 2023-24 as set out in Appendix A be accepted. Someone like to move?
Yeah, I'll move.
Councillor Jordan, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Thank you. All in favour? Carried. Thank
I'm
you.
not going to answer this question.
Okay. Going to move to agenda item 7 now. I think you might get your chance.
I just don't want to ask it now.
Agenda item 7, general fund revenue estimates for 23-24. I think it's over to you again, Sue.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A little bit more movement in these budgets. Not so much in the 22-23 revised budget, but you'll see there's an increase relating to 23-24. And that really reflects I think how things are in Hackney Carriages, but also because not all of the licences are needed annually. So the income does very much fluctuate between years, as you would see when you look at the forecast later on. If they're only 3 yearly, then income goes up and down, which does impact on the bottom line.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
Now I am on the right page. No, it's just it's the employee costs is not a problem, but it's just how many do we employ for that amount of money? Really?
It's not so much how many, it's probably what proportion of a person.
Yeah.
But we have somebody who deals with licensing applications, but that isn't the sole purpose of their job. It's part of their job. So I couldn't tell you the equivalent FTE off the top of my head, but it will be part of the person rather than a whole person.
Okay. Okay.
So that's an apportioned salary.
Yeah.
It does seem to be quite a big increase between the 23-24. Is that to do with the pay award that's just taken place?
Yes, it will be, but you'll see that. Yeah, it's probably reflecting both the 22-23, and then also obviously we will have a pay award in 23-24. So that's why it looks like a higher increase than you perhaps thought. So,
Thank you. Are there any other questions or points on this item? No, there's still no hands, so let's move to the recommendation to accept the revised budget and to accept or otherwise vary the estimates. Anyone happy to move that? Councillor Clues, seconder, Councillor Rice. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. That's carried.
Can I register an abstention?
So,
Just wanted to register an abstention.
okay. Well, carried with one abstention. Did you abstain as well?
I think you know what I'm saying. I didn't realize I didn't check.
Thanks,
Say on the ink.
Agenda item 8. Excuse me. Transport Act 1985, hiring of hackney carriages and separate fares. I'd like to thank the officers for bringing this report to us. It arose after a discussion we had after the previous meeting about where some members expressed concern about some residents not having access to sort of good bus services, and wondering whether we could sort of do something about that through the taxi licensing system. So I'm going to ask Clive to talk us through the report, if that's okay.
In summary, we members are probably aware that we license two types of vehicles that are broadly described as taxis. One's a hackney carriage, which has to take a fare by law. They can flag down the street, they can go on ranks, and the other is a private hire vehicle, which can't flag down and isn't obliged to take the fare. In relation to hackney carriages, it's possible for a scheme to be made which allows them to act in a very similar way to buses. So if the scheme were made, it would have appointed pickup points in whichever area you might choose to put them in, whichever has a demand. And it will allow people, instead of having a single person booking a cab, going from A to B, it will allow them to go on a particular route. So you could have 2 or 3 people, and then they would all pay a fare for the journey. And in principle, the idea would be that that would be a slightly lesser fare than if they hired the vehicle themselves, because if they had to pay the same, then there's no benefit. So what it can potentially do is it can introduce a new system of public transport, which potentially for outlying villages or where there's poor transport links may give some additional options for members of the public to use. There's a number of things we have to do as to bring the scheme in, but because that could take quite extensive work with a statutory consultation process and having to introduce a very detailed scheme with various conditions in it, it's thought that it might be better to approach this on an informal basis first, that if officers were to scope it with the trade and the public, and also work with, for example, Warwickshire County Council, any transport, any groups that might have an interest in transport locally, the representative bodies, parish councils, anyone who might have knowledge of where there's a lack of services, then that they would be able to hopefully inform us as to whether this is viable. Because obviously, and of course the trade, I'm forgetting that this essential part, because obviously it needs to work for both the public and the trade. And if the trade can see a potential market for it and it can be beneficial to the public, then there's a possibility that a scheme could be made. It can be made for all of our area, part of our area. It depends where the demand is, what the evidence shows. But rather than go straight to try and start constructing a scheme and a formal consultation process, I think there's a lot of benefit to that low-level informal approach, and then a further report will be brought back, and hopefully any responses will shape the direction that we can go in if it's appropriate to do it at all.
Thank you, Clive. What the members feel about it? My feeling is that this is worth exploring a little further, and I can see Councillor Parker's hand, so Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just a question. I mean, obviously, if a bus runs with only one passenger on or no passengers on, that's subsidised by central government, if I understand correctly. If you were passenger one and there was nobody on that route, would you be liable for the entire fare, or would the fare be subsidised in some way, shape, or form outside of this council?
Unfortunately, there's no immediate mechanism for subsidy that I'm aware of. I'll double check. There's a few provisions that the fare has to be set slightly. I'll just check. There has to be a slight reduction in fares, but it's not set that we have no discretion. But obviously that's the issue about it being viable for the trade as well, because if they turn up and there's 3 passengers, it's a good trip. If they turn up and there's 1, it might not be such a good trip because the fare is going to be lower in any event. So that's how the scheme has to work. It's obviously the margin is the issue. That a potential loss one day might be made good another day, but obviously for a business that's not necessarily the way they want to operate. So I think there's a lot of information to be established as to where this might work. And if, for example, there was particular demand from particular areas at particular times, then the scheme might be able to adapt to that, because it's more likely that the trade would have an interest in them. So I think that's one of the main reasons for trying to gauge the level of interest and the viability at another point, so that any time we do spend on this can be properly targeted and pick up things like that.
Councillor Humphreys and then Councillor McLaughlin.
I'm on the right page this time. I think it's a great scheme, and anything to do with rural bus routes and everything like that. One of the things it says here is requirements to be met in relation to hiring taxis at separate fares. So does that mean if 3 people get in, they're all paying the same fare? So the taxi driver gets 3 fares for one journey?
Yes, but depending on the nature of the scheme, you could have just being at random, you could have a point for pickups in Hartshill, and that could go to Atherstone, just as an example. So you say, here's point 1 to point 2, and you have the possibility of people, 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, getting in at point 1, going to and completing the whole journey. It's also, and they would pay a fare each. It's also possible to say, well, we'll have another pickup point, say Manchester, just so that people could go past the journey, Hartshill to Manchester, then someone could get out, someone else could get in. They would all, for each bit that they do, they would pay a separate fare. So it's very similar to a bus.
If 3 people went the whole journey together, say from Birchmoor to the George Eliot, just say 3 of them had to go to the hospital at the same time, would that be partial part of the journey between the 3 of them, or?
There would be the basis of fares would be set under the scheme, and obviously without having.
Yes, I know it's got to go into detail, but those are the sort of questions we would be asked.
And so that would be the case. So obviously the idea would be that the scheme to be attractive to the public would have to give them something that they can get, which is different from just booking their own, because so there would be separate fares payable. Obviously, it's the proportion, which is the thing that would be quite key to this, as to whether it helps the public, hinders the trade, or makes it unviable. Just overall. So
worth looking into. Anything?
Just comment on another point, just from the example that Councillor Hunt was gave, that if we made a scheme, then if a person was to book a journey that went between 2 points, but then went for some reason outside of the borough, then the scheme fares continue to apply. So they can't suddenly say we're going to charge everyone £20 now for the last bit to the hospital, for example. So let's say it's only general principles you can talk about at the moment, and I think that's the key to identifying where the need might be. Make it viable.
Anne, and then
Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis.
I was just keen to, I think this is a brilliant idea that for certain locations it would be very helpful. What I was keen on was to try and find out where there is possibly a scheme running that's successful, so we can learn quite quickly. Because I think with cost of living and everything, the more speedy we can be in gathering the information, the more helpful it'll be. So I don't know if we know already whether there's anywhere that's running it successfully.
I know there are some schemes across the country. I don't know a lot in the way of detail, and I think they could definitely be useful to learn certain things. Obviously, everyone's district is different, so there'll be things that are unique. But I think as an overall scheme, we might be able to learn something. That could certainly be part of this process.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Thanks, Chair. As Mr. Tobin said, it would be running somewhat like a bus. Was there any attachment to the older person's bus pass? Is there any link anywhere within that?
No, no. It operates like a bus, and unfortunately doesn't have that same.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Jordan.
I was just going to bring up the same point that Councillor McLaughlin just brought up, whether it's been run in any other area across the UK and how well it's been run, and whether we can pull off that information from them so that we don't have any stumbling blocks. But also, in principle, I agree that it should be explored more. But I'm just wondering how the taxi drivers will take it, because potentially it could be costing them fares. But I think it's a good scheme, and I think we should take it forward.
So I agree, and obviously anything we can learn from that, we will try and take on board early, because I think that's the key to getting that information. Just an interesting provision of the legislation is that if more than 10% of the licence holders make a request, we'd have to look into doing a scheme. So we'd have to produce one. And in some ways, if the trade are on board early and they can identify some routes where this might work, then that would be helpful to us.
Clues.
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit going back to what Clive said about picking up like at bus stops. So they won't be picking them up from their homes, they'll be picking them up from designated areas.
Yeah.
And then going back to 4.2, safer communities implications, and 4.21, a well-regulated taxi service is important in providing safe transport for many vulnerable people. My only concern would be if you're, just say Alice is going to the hairdressers and she's going down the road and picking Mary up, they both know each other. Where if you're getting into a taxi and you're picking a stranger up at the next one and that person's getting into the back of the taxi with a vulnerable person, that would just be, I think, my concern. But other than that, I think it could work really well, especially in some of the villages.
Okay. Any more? Councillor Humphreys.
Just very quickly, I know you're looking into the scheme, Clive. I just wondered how long it might be before we actually do know anything about how it's going forward.
I think it's easy for me to sit here and promise things. I know a lot of the work will be done by licensing, who they have a knowledge of the tax trade locally, and B, they're currently undertaking quite a bit of work in sort of review of policy, etc. So the first is they've got the knowledge. Secondly, they've got the policy work to finish. I don't want to make a promise on their behalf, but I think that this is a general information gathering step. So it may be a few months. We've got to give even though it's an informal consultation, we want to give a reasonable opportunity for people to respond, and then I think there would be considerably more work to actually refine the scheme. So unfortunately, it's not going to be really quick. And I say that we would be looking quite a long way into this year before anything, if it seems being viable, before anything could be brought in. Because it's the statutory consultation parts which are the, if you like, the hurdles. So we haven't got any option but to follow those. That's why this may be a good indicator. I think a couple of months is the minimum we'd be able to get something back.
Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis.
So just one last little clarification. Is there any demarcation between private hire and hackney cabs in this?
They're hackney carriages that will be able to do this, not private hire.
Thank you, Clive. I think the feeling is that this is worth exploring a bit further. I certainly think it is. Presumably, if the informal consultation is positive, we then need to proceed to a formal consultation as well.
Yes. So obviously we'd have a reasonable idea which direction we'd be heading.
Okay, thank you. So to the recommendation, I can't see any other hands. The recommendation on page 8/1, that the committee consider whether in principle it would be beneficial to consider making a scheme, and if the committee determined that it would be beneficial to do so, agree that the officers should carry out informal consultations. It's been moved by Councillor Humphreys, seconded by Councillor Parker. Show of hands, please. I think that's unanimous, no abstentions this time. So that's carried. And finally, we have agenda item 9, review of the taxi licensing policy. I think you're going to take us through this.
So thank you, Chair. This is really just an update report. The council had in place a number of policies in relation to various aspects of the taxi trade, and picked up on there the difference between private hire and carriages. There's various licenses that need to be issued for drivers for the vehicles and for operators of private hire vehicles. And at the moment, the provisions are in a number of policies. All of them have required some review. And there was some work undertaken to start bringing those up to date in any event. And whilst that process has been ongoing, some legislation has been brought into effect requiring us to address certain specific provisions, which we had met some of those requirements, but not all of them. And then additional legislation which has amended provisions regarding disabled access to taxis, and provisions that we have to make sure are in the conditions which we attach to grants of certain vehicles. And so those, because they came in during the ongoing review, has just put it back a little. So it's just a note for members to be aware that we are in the process of doing this. Obviously, safe vehicles and safe drivers are central to the scheme of licensing generally. And the benefit of this exercise, we believe, is having a single policy document that addresses all aspects of private hire and hackney licensing. Because I think one of the difficulties being that members of the trade and members of the public have been, they see one provision in one place and then they're not aware of something else. Although we will signpost them to the correct document if they make an inquiry, if they have it all in a single document which is up to date and cross-references as necessary, then there will be hopefully an easier process for anyone applying and for the public to understand how the schemes work.
Thank you for that, Clive. Any questions? Councillor Jordan.
Just on point 3.8, when are we likely to see this draft policy, Clive?
I know that some further work was sent to me on it last week, which we're getting those, but there's quite a few things in draft which are addressing these latest provisions, and some of which only came in December. So I was sent a draft last week, and so hopefully within a few weeks we can refine those things, and then when we know where we are and if there's any additional work to do, following that we can pencil in a date for another meeting and hopefully be able to bring it again in the next few months.
And so I can't recall, sorry, through you, Chair, I can't recall when our next meeting is, to be fair. I can't recall if there's, what is it, a couple of months?
We haven't got a scheduled meeting at the moment because taxis, both licensing committees, they tend to be a bit more ad hoc to match applications that are received. So we don't have one actually in the calendar at the moment.
Okay, then. Thank you.
So I'm going to assume from that it's possible this might not come to committee before the elections, when it might be a different committee.
So it may do, as I again can't promise, because so not having seen had a chance to look in detail at the next amendments and gone through all the legislation, I can't say whether it's likely we need a lot more work, and if we do need work, what that would be. So I wouldn't want to say give anything definite, but I'd say it'd be, I think a couple of months would be perhaps the minimum. You know,
May do that.
We'll look forward to it. Any other comments? In that case, I want to take us to the recommendation, which is that the committee notes the report and the committee agrees to the inclusion of the relevant policy provisions in a single policy. So we'll with that. Moved by Councillor Jordan, seconded by Councillor Jarvis, I think. Saw a few hands. Have a show of hands, all in favour? That appears to be unanimous. Thank you. Carried. Thank you. So with that, I'll bring the meeting to a close, and just in case this is our last meeting before the elections, as soon as possible, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and your input into the committee, and hopefully some of us will be back at least.